Welcome to the latest edition of Inside CKP. I'm your host, Jeremy Como. Before I introduce my guest today, I'm going to pay the bills. This fine show is brought to you by Chris Kennedy Publishing. You can find everything, all your literary needs, including sci-fi, military sci-fi, space opera, fantasy, dash of romance, some nonfiction in there too. Go check them out. Also, sign up for their newsletter. You get all kinds of free stuff, and you could potentially become a pre-reader if you're a good little boy or girl. Also, if you want to support this show and CKP, go to their Patreon. They've got lots of goodies there, including a CKP Confidential, which you can find my guest today on. You can go through their website, or you can find them on Amazon. If you find them on Amazon, give them a follow on Amazon, because that's a thing now. And of course, for news and such, you can find CKP Publishing on Facebook. The fan page is the Factory Floor. There's also the 4HU, the Four Horsemen Universe fan page, the Fallen World, all kinds of fan pages on there, but this is the primary CKP fan page. And of course, if you've made it this far to where you're watching this video, you know that we're on YouTube. Search us at Chris Kennedy Publishing on YouTube. And now that the bills are paid, I have my illustrious guest, Mr. Casey Moops Moores, on the show today. Welcome. And this is your first time on the show solo. You've been on the show many times, but this is the first time you've been on the show solo. So I appreciate you coming on board. And there's a very good reason that you're here today, and we'll get into that in a minute. But first, let's tell people where they can find you online.
My main webpage is www.caseymoores.net. It's kind of a work in progress, so apologies for that, but hopefully it'll be up and running by the time the book launches. You can also find me on Facebook at Casey Moores Writer. Make sure you get that S on my name. You can also find me on Instagram. I believe it's casey.moops. And then I got Twitter as well. And you can find me on Amazon. If you go to Amazon, search me up as Casey Moores. Make sure you get that S on the end of the name, because that S makes me unspellable, unfindable, and unpronounceable to most of the world for some reason. Not sure why. So Amazon will say, "Are you sure? Did you mean Casey Moore?" No, you meant Casey Moores.
Okay. Awesome. Well, and I would have the link to your book, but we are pre-recording this. But the link to your book will be in the show notes, and we're going to set this as a premiere. So when we have this premiere go live, I'll put the link for the book in the comments. So click in the comments on the link, and you can go straight to the book. And since I've said it, let's go ahead and talk about why we're here today. And it's because this young man has a new book out today.
Still love that cover. And it's so different than every other 4HU cover.
Yeah. This is awesome. So, so let's talk about it now. Well, if you notice, for 4HU fans, if you notice the silhouette, you'll see it in many of the covers that incorporate this species or this character, and to where we don't actually ever see them, but somehow you're going to know they're there. They'll leave their mark on you, and that's let's go ahead and talk about that. So, what is your primary, the primary species of the character in this book?
The primary species is the hunter race, the Depik. Obviously, without spoiling too much of all the previous books, they've sort of had a difficult time over the last few years of the 4HU storyline. They were nearly eradicated. Their planet was invaded and taken over, and they had a massive fight to take it back. And they're sort of feeling their way back out into the universe, collecting their pieces and trying to rebuild. Now, something I keyed in on is generally the generation after something this catastrophic, the younger generation in any, to take human history, for example, the next generation generally wants things to be different than they were, to find a different path than their previous generations have followed, because they don't want to wind up in the same place. And that's sort of where we are right now. So as you said, on all the other covers, we've never actually seen them. We've always seen them in the shadows. And honestly, it was a little bit of a fight on the cover for me, because in a way, this is sort of a galactic coming out for this race. And because yes, that is one of them on stage. That character in the novel, their projection is blasted to the at least everybody in attendance, and to the galaxy in general. And she is singing songs about who her people are, who her race is.
Singing the songs of their people.
Singing the songs of her people. Yep.
So, when I saw the cover, I was very surprised. I was like, "Whoa, that's out in front. That's they're on stage, and that's why we only see their silhouette, because they're in the shadows, and they to this point have been a very covert and secretive race. So that really stood out to me. So, can you describe the image a little bit? I guess without giving away too much, but the significance of the image, or what it depicts?
Well, like I said, that different path that this individual Depik kit has chosen, she has the same purpose as her mother, but she's going about it an entirely different way. Instead of lurking in the shadows and doing the hunter and following the hunter path of, sneaking, investigating, threatening where necessary, she's decided to broadcast herself to the entire planet, in the hopes that the individual that they're searching for, will see her and come to her. That's
Cool.
that's the goal of that, but it also accidentally, or maybe intentionally on her part, also serves the purpose of allowing her to be who she wanted to be. She did not
That's
want to
awesome.
be a hunter. She did not want to be an assassin. Early in the novel, she sings a song, a rewrite of Joan Jett's Bad Reputation, about how she doesn't want to do what her people have always done. And
So she's a rebellious youngster.
yet she is a rebellious youngster.
Okay.
And she is following all of humanity's punk rock, tropes, you could say.
Now you've written about Depik before.
Yeah, the very first short story I ever had accepted for publication was Blind Fury in Negotiation. And I think I've learned a lot about writing since then, but I'm still very proud of that story. I'm very proud of the sort of core atmosphere of that story. The idea of a blind samurai like Zatoichi from Japanese slasher classics just seemed a
Mm-hmm.
perfect companion to a Depik. And so I
Mm-hmm.
was writing a Depik companion long before the idea of a Depik companion series was announced.
Mm-hmm.
These two characters met in Blind Fury Negotiation. Zato Hachi was originally the contract for Okio, my Depik character. And you can read that story to find out what happens with that. Later on, those two characters show up in Mess with the Bull. They're a side story to that entire
Mm-hmm.
chain of events. I like to say Mess with the Bull was sort of an Ocean's 11 in a way, in that all the pieces fell into place, but they were sort of the wild card in the background of the entire story. And a lot of their story played out until the rest of the Depik series sort of caught up and surpassed them. And now I'm writing not too long after the events that took place in Ally, and what that means for Katash, and what the Depik race is doing, trying to, like I say, collect the pieces and rebuild, and determine their way forward in the galaxy. And the short version to the entire novel is that there are two entirely separate stories going on. One, Okio and Zatohachi going forward on their mission, trying to do things the way that they have always, or doing things the way that they have always done things, in the way that only Zatohachi and Okyo really can. And then the other half of the story is their rebellious daughter who has decided her name is Blackheart and going on her own path to try and accomplish the same mission in an entirely different way. So that's kind of the heart of it.
So there's it sounds like a big Japanese influence. Oh, sorry. So there's a big, it sounds like a big Japanese influence in the book.
Yeah, I when I was at the Air Force Academy, I learned ninjutsu, and but it's actually the school I was learning from was a combination of 9 different traditional Japanese schools, and only 3 of them were traditionally Ninpo schools. The rest were actually traditional samurai schools. There was a wide range of arts that were being taught in Bujinkan. I recreated that sort of in the Laughing Coyote School for Martial Arts that makes an appearance in Negotiation and Mess with the Bull and in Companion to Darkness. They're called the Xenocentric School of Martial Arts. That's basically teaching humans how to deal with alien races, and that was sort of the inspiration for that. But through that background, I fell in love with the Japanese culture. I got a minor in Japanese. I still can't hold a conversation, I'll be honest. And I go to Japan, but I know a good deal of Japanese history. I have watched some of the samurai classics. I was a huge fan of Lone Wolf and Cub. I even cosplayed them a few years back when I had our first baby. I had to put her in a baby cart and push her around dressed as Lone Wolf. It was just something I had to do. And so,
Yeah, I understand.
Satoichi, Kage no Gundam, all of those classics, when I was offered, when the idea of a Depik Central anthology came up, that was the first thing that came to mind, was Satoichi from the Japanese cinema classics. So I've pulled a little bit of that. I've pulled a little bit of Lone Wolf and Cub. I pulled a little bit of the even Yojimbo to a certain degree. All of the samurai heroes of Japanese cinema. I've sort of pulled them all together. If somebody will notice, I have a habit of naming all my chapters. All the Okyo and Zatohachi chapters are named after actual episodes of the Zatoichi TV series. And all of the
Very
Blackheart
cool.
chapters are named after punk rock songs, usually female, but I gotta blend in there. One battle in particular just could not be the Blitzkrieg Pop. Blitzkrieg Pop. So, yes, there is a whole lot
No,
of
that's awesome.
background, Japanese samurai cinema background that I pulled into it.
So, did you incorporate any like a lot of people will insert some of their personality or people they know personality traits into a character? Did you incorporate any of that?
I mean, I did put hints of my own personal experience into Zatohachi, but obviously I've never been a blind samurai mercenary in a greater galaxy. But there are hints of my experience put into his story. Largely the relationship between Okyo and Blackheart. I've sort of pulled that. I've sort of tried to weave into it the relationship between a mother and a rebellious teenage daughter that a lot of parents will probably appreciate or recognize. Uh, I do have a preteen daughter, so I did have some inspiration for that, and I also, have witnessed friends. I've witnessed that relationship on TV and in cinema is something that's been a sort of expansively investigated through all sorts of media. So I definitely drew heavily on the wide range of media that's gone into that relationship between a mother and a rebellious daughter. And, the daughter doesn't always understand why the mother does things the way they do that. The mother doesn't always want to relinquish the control, or the she doesn't want to allow her daughter the freedom to make the same mistakes she did. She just wants to tell her what they were and tell her not to make them again. So, there's a lot going on there.
So now, companion. This is a companion novel to the original series of the Hunters between Marissa Wolf and Casey Zell. Do you necessarily have to read those books to read this novel?
Not really. It would be, I would say, Blind Fury and Mess with the Bull, maybe, just that you have knowledge of the characters. On the other hand, I tried to catch everything up. So early on in the novel, I show what's happening between the events of Mess with the Bull and Companion to Darkness, because several years have passed, because obviously Okio did not have any kids in Mess with the Bull. She just learned at the end that it was a possibility.
Mhm.
And then for several years later, where I will say she's had several kits. And then Zato Hachi and he is the instructor. He is Blackheart's primary teacher. And they have a very lengthy discussion about what has happened on Katash, what has happened in the greater galaxy, and the events that brought them to the situation they're in. So I definitely catch the reader up if they're not aware, if they haven't read anything else in the Four Horsemen in general, to be honest,
Mhm.
and definitely the storyline of the Depik as a whole.
So while we do encourage the audience to go read the two short stories leading up to this,
And all the other Depik novels.
and all the other novels, you don't have to, although we do highly encourage.
Yeah.
So speaking of, can you tell me about now? Is this going to be, this is a companion novel or a companion series?
The Depik Companion, it will be a series of novels. To date, I've only written one, and
Mhm.
I am kind of trying my best to focus on an entirely different series outside the Four Horsemen that I've been hinting about and all of my other things. The project has taken longer than I wanted to, but I'm nearing completion of what's going to be the second novel in that
Mhm.
series. So if I can get some momentum and get a stack of novels, we can start releasing that series. It's a near future military science fiction series. I've been trying to I've been putting most of my focus on that. So at this stage, Companion to Darkness might be my last solo Four Horsemen book for a while,
Mhm.
until I can get that other series out, and maybe I'll come back to the Four Horsemen later. I would love to. There's a lot of things I would like to write more about Bull, who does not make any appearance in Companion to Darkness. I hope I didn't just ruin it for some readers, but this is all entirely Okio Zatohachi and Blackheart's story. But I would like to write. I would like to continue this story. I would like to continue the story of Bull. And actually, right now, I'm in the midst of reading a short story with Alvin and Simon and Theodore, the three flat tar from Unshackled. So
Mhm.
that might be coming out in an anthology later. We'll see what happens. But I would like to continue writing the Four Horsemen. I have refocused myself on something else that I'm trying to and I'm very excited about. I just need to finish it up.
So, any, I know you just gave us a little teaser. Is there anything else we could squeeze out of you about the series that you're trying to do yourself?
Um, it's co-authored. I don't think with somebody who's actually sort of large in the industry. I'm not sure if I'm ready to openly say
Got
who
it.
that is on a
Got it.
podcast yet, because I don't want to jinx anything before the series is ready to release.
I understand that.
But like I said, it's near military. It's near future military science fiction, and the short version is a historically um, oppressed people are given a military advantage that is um, it's game changing. It's paradigm shifting essentially. Uh, when the DoD cancels a DARPA program to develop military combat suits. The creator of those suits, who's sort of an Elon Musk analog,
Mm-hmm.
walks that creation over to a people who have only recently received, who have only recently formed as a nation for not the first time in history, but the longest contiguous time in history. But even so, their enemies are um, foaming at the mouth to destroy them, as they have through all of history. So they receive this military advantage. And first, it's all about survival. The initial several novels of this series are going to be about survival. But what survival means is going to expand over the course of the series.
Very nice. Thank you. What, and best laid plans and all, but so how many, as you see it now, how many books in the series?
We've easily got the plans for 7. My co-author is the one that wrote the initial novel, and that is finished. I'm currently writing the bulk of the second novel. 3 and 4 and 5 are very the ideas, the plans for those are very easily laid out. Not completely fleshed out, but we know exactly what's going to happen in books 3, 4, and 5. And like I said, this thing is only going to spiral outward. So
I'm excited.
6, 7, 8 would be easy. I can easily envision 10 probably in the end. I don't want to promise too much, but I can tell you that 1 through 5, we know what's going to happen. And there's easily several more novels after that.
Okay, so at least 5. All right.
At least 5.
At least 5. All right. Well, thank you.
I still have to finish writing number 2, and I'm way beyond what I personally set for myself on number 2. Yeah. But my co-author is in no rush, so I'm the only one sort of pushing to get it all to make sure that it happens on a certain timeline.
That's awesome, man. Well, I'm excited for you. That sounds very very interesting. So now, Companion to Darkness is, like you said, is not your first Four Horsemen novel.
No, but it is the only Four Horsemen novel I've written entirely about Okio and Zatohachi.
Yeah. Now, what other Four Horsemen novels have you been in?
Well, in the Four Horsemen universe, I'm largely known for creating my character Bull, a sort of black ops rescue company, shadowy figure in the background. He was, I accidentally, in writing my first novel, These Things We Do, with Kevin Eikenberry's permission, but I accidentally turned Bull into the person that helped Snowman create the intergalactic haulers. And then I sort of developed him into a sort of background figure in the life of Jessica Francis. It's more fully fleshed out in Mess with the Bull. You have these little snippets because Jessica Francis is searching for her father at the time, and she's learning about this person named Bull, and she's realizing that she knew him as a child. She has these flashes of a man she didn't know, and she's putting the pieces together and realizing that Bull was that person who was sort of in the background of some of the major events of her life. So I introduced Bull in the first short story, The Mushroom Farm. And I sort of accidentally created Bull in the same way that Kevin Eikenberry accidentally created Jessica Francis as a background character in one of his short stories. I shortly after writing Blind Fury for negotiation, I had it in my head that I wanted to recreate the Son-Tay raid in Vietnam, which, if nobody knows, in Vietnam, the Son-Tay raid was an aerial mission of C-130s and helicopters that penetrated all the way through Vietnam, North Vietnam, into the outskirts of Hanoi to rescue prisoners of war from a compound. It's one of the most wildly successful raids, deep strike raids in history, in the sense that there was only a single casualty, and that was a twisted ankle when somebody jumped out of one of the helicopters, I believe, during the infiltration. However, those prisoners of war had been moved, unbeknownst to intelligence, a couple months earlier. They heard the entire raid happening. saw the illumination flare go off. They heard we intentionally crashed a helicopter into the prison so that we wouldn't lose the element of surprise. But then they took down the few guards that were there, and then they found out the place was actually abandoned and empty. And then they loaded back up and they exfiltrated all the way back to, I believe, Thailand. So I recreated that in the Four Horsemen universe. In doing so, I created my character Bull to be the mastermind, and I just sort of carried that forward. I wrote his origin story and these things we do. That one I drew heavily from my personal experience in the military as both a rescue and a special ops pilot. I did base it heavily on a person I know personally and an actual human being that I know personally who is very much like Bull. And then later on, after that novel came out, I knew that Bull, there was a lot more story to tell. So I wrote Mess with the Bull, and I followed it up with Unshackled, which doesn't actually have much of Bull in it, but it has his operation is heavily involved. So I had originally envisioned that Mess with the Bull and Unshackled as one novel. And I was about halfway through writing Mess with the Bull, realizing I was well over half of a novel and realizing that the two concepts were entirely different anyway. So when Mess with the Bull, Bull is rescuing. This is sort of the bread and butter of what Bull does. He's out trying to rescue a beleaguered human mercenary unit at the outset of the Omega Wars, just like he was in the Mushroom Farm. But this one is a little bit more personal. And I will say that there are forces that conspire to draw him there for reasons. Meanwhile, while he is dealing with that, and again, as I said before, that entire novel sort of plays out in a sort of Ocean's 11 chain of events. At least two masterminds and actually a couple more are arranging all the chess pieces in the right in their own personal ways, thinking that they have thought through all the contingencies and possibilities, and both turn out to be wrong. I'll throw that out there. And then I've got my wild cards, Okio and Zato Hachi, who make an appearance as well. And then in Unshackled, while that's going on, Bull's secret moon base from these things we do, that is attacked by the Science Guild, who are looking for certain things that have actually been in place since before these things we do, actually, since some of the things that Kevin Eikenberry started writing with the Peacemaker series. And the Science Guild shows up at the moon base with, a massive fleet and a very unconventional method of assault that we see a little bit of in one of the other mainstream novels, but they essentially flood the base looking for this object. And that one was a lot of fun. It was a lot more different. I wrote that with Jamie Gibson, and we actually turning it into Die Hard on a Moon. Senator Roxtador from Gunship Diplomacy. One of Jamie Insom's characters is the commander of that station. And we've got the three Flatar, who their humans have named Alvin, Simon, and Theodore, who, again, I'm writing a short story about right now. And the remains of the human company, the Regulators, who are now called the Irregulators because they have been subjected to some very strange experiments. And so now they're a very strange cast of characters. And I believe the Irregulators are going to make an appearance in the next Rogel novel. So that's my mainstream part is Bull. And then I think the last novel that I actually had come out in the Four Horsemen universe was As My Witnesses. That's the third Rogel novel. Rob Hampson and Senator Medlock invited me to be a part of that novel. And when they were telling me the sort of thing that they wanted to involve, I reached all the way back to the very first short story I wrote when I started writing again. This is really the story that got me writing. I wrote when I was in high school. I wrote a little bit at the Air Force when I was at the Air Force Academy, and early in my career I started writing, but then I just sort of got it bogged down with, flying rescue and special ops and the events of my life. I kind of stopped writing for about 15 years.
I can understand that.
And then Girl Casey, as my career was calming down, asked me if I wanted to write when I retired. And at the time, I was like, nah, I don't think so. I'm not really sure if I could do that because there are some reasons. But then I found out that I learned and started reading about the Four Horsemen universe. I went to Dragon Con in 2018. I went to the Four Horsemen panel. Sitting in that panel, I wrote a story in my head. And as soon as I got back from that Dragon Con, I wrote that story out over a weekend. And it was rough. It was the first thing I'd written in a long time. It was my first real writing. So it was actually a several year process to get that to something readable. But that became the core part of my contribution to As My Witnesses. The story of the Croatoans, a alpha company, alpha contract company that's actually been lost and abandoned on an uninhabitable planet for the last 100 years, fighting for survival and developing into an entirely new culture of their own. And they are discovered by the Rogel and As My Witnesses. Actually, they're discovered by Bull, and then they're rediscovered by the Rogel and As My Witnesses.
Okay.
So that's that story. So that is the bulk of what I've written. I also wrote a short story in Set the Terms, Recovery. Mm-hmm. It's an early story of Blue Flight and the Peacemakers. I wrote The Audition in the anthology In the Wings. And that was the story of Archie, one of the other characters in Mess with the Bull, one of the other prominent characters in Bull's organization. I co-wrote Freedom of Maneuver with Kevin Eikenberry in the Gates of Hell anthology, which is also where Mushroom Farm was first published. So I am the only author that has 2 short stories in one anthology.
And congratulations.
Because I snuck one in by co-writing with Kevin Eikenberry. That was a lot of fun. That was largely one of his earlier companies, the Marauders. Kevin Eikenberry's first short story, Stand on It. He introduced the Marauders, and that is ultimately the foil to Jessica Francis, or at least the leader of the Marauders is the foil to Jessica Francis. And we wrote one of their earlier missions, and essentially how members of that company have to essentially play their commander to achieve success. It was a lot of fun to write. Again, that was sort of drawing from some personal military experiences, some of the things that some of the lower ranking individuals have to do sometimes to coax their commander to the answer without making it look like it was their idea, or to make it look like it was his idea, make him think it was his idea. Mm-hmm. Trying to think if there's another anthology out there I'm forgetting, but
well, not coming. Got it.
Yeah, that's the bulk of all my other work. I just released The Gilded Cage, my contribution to the Fallen World series. From the anthology, I created a character who was responsible for the conventional bombing of Colorado Springs on the day that the rest of the world was destroyed, largely by nukes. So the question that stands is, why was Colorado Springs conventionally bombed as opposed to nuked like everybody else? The secret is buried deep within Cheyenne Mountain, and that's explored in my story, The Cage, where that same individual who destroyed all of Colorado Springs, was part of the fleet of bombers that destroyed Colorado Springs, is now leading a community of survivors in the previously abandoned Air Force Academy. So hilarity ensues. I've got some Wolf Riders. I've got some cyborgs. I've got plenty of agents and specialists. It's a free-for-all. Very fun story. I've also got a JTF-13 novel out there I'm very proud of, Witch Hunt, about monster hunting Civil War Marines in the Civil War. I'm particularly proud of the level of actual history I wove into that story. And I've actually gotten some praises for people who consider themselves Civil War historians, saying that I did a really good job, specifically involving history of the Marines in the Civil War, which is largely unknown. And I got that directly from a very well-written series of novels about the Marines in the Civil War, tracking all their actual individual movements and the individuals. And I've woven that into Witch Hunt. Got a lot of short stories out there as well. Most of my short stories are centered in what I call my Death Mage War universe. It's sort of a fantasy World War I setting. It's not actually World War I. It's your standard epic fantasy world with dragons and magic users and knights and orcs, gnomes, and what have you. But in the back, but this world has also developed World War I levels of technology, and the sort of upheaval that entails. Magic is no longer the most destructive thing in this world.
Okay.
Dragons, my story, The Quaint Pastime, a dragon learns that he is no longer the god of the battlefield. And in history's actual World War I, it was a great time. It was politically, socially, militarily, all the old rules were broken by World War I. The world had to pick up the pieces, not just from the destruction that war caused, but by the reorganization of society. Now women were going to work. Now monarchs were deposed and replaced by representative governments in a lot of places. A lot of ancient empires crumbled and either splintered into new countries. That same thing is happening in my Death Mage War universe, but we have that element of magic where, there are societies that are being supplanted or rendered obsolete, essentially, and all that entails. I've got a whole slew of short stories along those lines. Someday, I would like to develop that into a series of novels, but today, not that day.
Yeah. Well, so would you classify yourself as a big history buff?
Yeah. Not as well as some people that I know in this community that could quote, specific Roman generals, but I know a lot of the details. My father was a big military historian. I'd say that I know a lot more than most about history in general, and specifically the Civil War, World War I, World War II. Not as much as somebody with a major or a degree, but
So, other than the kind of alternate history or fantasy books that you already mentioned using historical figures, do you have any other alternate history type short stories or books that you have done, or you would maybe we could see in the future from you?
That I haven't already noted? No. The JTF-13, that is sort of a secret history. I also have a short story that goes back to the Mexican War and what happened to one of my main characters from Witch Hunt, what happened to his father. In the story of Witch Hunt, one of my main characters, Lieutenant Addison Green, everywhere he goes, the Union generals know who he is. They know who his father was. And they all speak in hushed tones about what happened in the Mexican War. And in JTF-13 Legends, I wrote about that story. And actually, I'm getting a little bit teary-eyed just thinking about it. Sorry.
That's a good story.
More and more, and I'm going to say this a little bit egotistically, more and more I'm finding that some of the things that I've written in the last year or two make me very emotional. My story in JTF-13 Legends, just thinking about it, my eyes start tearing up when I think about my short story and my single contribution to the Salvage title universe, short story Salvage Angel from It Takes More Kinds. I say the name of that story out loud and I start getting
oh really?
Yeah, starts getting hard for me. And then I didn't even think about it in The Gilded Cage until I'd finished reading it, but there are several lines. I'm sorry, I got a helicopter flying over. I live working at an Air Force base. There are several lines from The Gilded Cage. If I say them out loud, I'll have instant tears. And then there's a few emotional moments in Companion to Darkness that, again, I kind of surprised myself. So I'm sure people will know what I'm talking about when they get there.
Yeah, that sounds like amazing stories. Go check them out, people. So, what would you like to write more alternate history?
Yeah, the JTF-13 series, again, I have a stack of projects I would love to write more on. I would like to write more in the Four Horsemen universe. I would love to write more of my monster hunting Civil War Marines in JTF-13. I'd like to continue writing the story in The Gilded Cage. I've actually got plans with somebody else. I might have, if we can ever find the time, I have, an idea of how that story can continue. I want to write the Death Mage Wars as an actual novel series. Right now, I'm hoping I'm trying to put my focus onto what I said is in this near future military science fiction series that I'm hoping will be the large thing that I become known for, as opposed to so far I've been tagging along in somebody else's universe. I think the two things that are really more me as opposed to something that I just sort of signed on to, like the Four Horsemen universe. I was walking to someone else's universe. This fallen world, I was walking to someone else's universe. JTF-13, that concept had been created, but then I made the entire Civil War piece mine. So that I feel very confident that as much as it's in a larger universe of novels, that part of that universe is entirely mine and entirely something I created. The Death Mage Wars, entirely something I created, but at this point, it's only a series of short stories. All that said, I'm hoping that this secret project I keep hinting at, I'm very, very excited about it. I'm very excited with what we're doing in a lot of ways. And I'm putting some faith or some hope in developing that series will become sort of my first real personal big thing.
Awesome. So do you have an approximation of when we could see this project come to fruition?
That depends on how many novels we decide we want finished before we start putting it all out. I think we've decided that the magic number is 3. I'm for the last 3 months, I've been saying I want to finish this book this month. I think May. At the very least, it's going to be 95, closing in 100% complete, at least enough that I can hand off what I have to my co-author and have him fiddle around with it, fill in the blanks, and organize it while I move on into book 3. So at the end of this month, or I would say I really want to have it done, this first novel of mine, done by Liberty Con, a third book somewhere in the ballpark of Dragon Con, definitely by the end of the year. I'd like to be working on a 4th novel by the end of the year. So if we have 3 books done by Dragon Con through October-ish, and I say that knowing that every time I put out a date, it slides by months. But if we can have 3 novels out by sort of the Dragon Con time period, ideally, we can start putting a lineup to publish them. And by the time that we have that lineup and by the time they start coming out, maybe on a monthly basis, I can have a 4th novel. We can have a 4th novel completed and then maybe be moving on to 5. So I'd like to start with some momentum and keep it going. So end of the year.
Sounds awesome, man.
Ideally.
Well, I'm excited for you, man. It sounds like something you're really into, and if you're writing stories that are making you cry just thinking about them, then I can't imagine what's gonna come out with a full series. So, Companion to the Darkness it's not your first solo novel, right?
No, my first novel, These Things We Do, was a solo novel, and that came about because Kevin Eikenberry asked me if I had any ideas, and I started talking about more stories that I would write about Bull, and then he lined it all up and said, well, you write this, you write this, you write that, there's a novel, go do that. And I was like, but
awesome.
Okay. So I wrote a novel, but my first novel was solo.
Yeah. Sir, yes, sir.
Yeah.
Well, so what do you like more or different, or what do you like about writing solo versus with someone besides the money? Besides the money,
it is nice to
the pros and
keep
cons?
all the money. That's pretty cool.
Yeah.
There's definitely pros and cons. I've had some good experiences co-writing, and that's just, you have that shared load of writing the pieces. I will say for this current series I'm writing on, I am, it was understood from the start that I would be doing the lion's share of the writing, and I'm totally okay with that. But I still have that not echo chamber, but I have that interaction. And every time I'm stuck, I just call him up and I'm like, hey, I'm writing this piece. It's not feeling right. I don't know what I'm doing with it. I think I'm fumbling along. This sounds like some of the other things that I've written. I can't just recreate that scene over here. What do you think? And we'll generally talk through those things. My first co-written novel was Unshackled with Jamie Ibsen, and that was just awesome. We just sort of riffed off of each other. There was a little bit of frustration, I think, on both our parts as we were both finishing up with the projects before we finally got going on that one. But once we got going, it was, all cylinders firing, and we just, everything we did played off each other, and it just we started a slow jog, and then soon we were both sprinting to the finish line. Ibsen and I have discussed that maybe someday in the future we'll try and write something together again, and that would be awesome. I would love to do that. I've had for As My Witnesses, that was a little bit more focused. I was told very specifically what to write, and I'd throw my own ideas out there. We'd have a little bit of back and forth, but that was a little bit more separate on my part, in that this is what I'm writing. So I wandered off by myself. I wrote that piece. I gave it back to them. We worked in some of the margins. If I had questions, I went back to them. But largely, it was just, this is your section to write. And I wrote it the same way that I wrote a solo novel. So on the solo novels, you have the final say in everything. It's not a back and forth. So, that's sort of a pro to it. You have your idea of what you want to do, and that's what's happening. On the other hand, if something sticks, or you don't like something, or one of the choices you made turns out to be bad or wrong, it can take a lot to back up the train and go back to fix it. Whereas, sometimes it's harder for you to identify your own inconsistencies or some of your own poor plot lines. It takes, if you're co-writing with somebody and you're discussing these things as they happen, you have somebody else, another brain over there going, wait a second, but you told me this, and now that doesn't work. And if you really can't do that. Like I said, sometimes if you don't have that, by the time you figure it out, it's too late.
Right.
And it's kind of catastrophic. Or you find yourself backpedaling a little bit too hard to go fix the holy plot line back in. So, I've had some very good
do you ever find your
Sorry
about that. Do you ever find yourself getting competitive with a co-author in a good way? Like I said, well, I wrote this much today, and so, oh, really? Well, I wrote twice as much. So what you gonna do about it? Do you ever get that where it's a fun, competitive attitude?
The only time I've really had the opportunity to do that was when I was co-writing Unshackled with Jamie Ibsen, and it was. And I would say we weren't actually actively competitive. It was just more of like, it was more like a spiral. The more one of us wrote, the more the other one of us wrote. And we weren't actively saying, haha, I got 3,000 words. Well, I got 3,001. It was more just hey, I wrote this whole section, go check it out. And the other person, and I'd go in and read it, and it'd be like, oh, cool, I got to write this section. And it was more that we were just building on each other constantly. And, I'd say the last third of that novel almost wrote itself, just because we kept on, racing over each other to get to the finish line, because we were so excited about where it was going based on what the other person had written and what that set up for what we were trying to do. That's really the only time I've had that experience, because, like I said, my other co-authoring situations have always been sort of vastly different. I think that's the only one where it was fully equal, I guess. As opposed to As My Witnesses, where I was writing a specific share. And honestly, I think maybe 2/5 of that novel had already been written, and I wrote about the next 2/5, and then Rob Hampson, basically wrote the end of it. I co-wrote a story with Kevin Eikenberry, but that was just a short story, and it was largely, it was kind of the same situation I'm in with my co-author of the series right now, where Kevin Eikenberry had the big idea. He and I sort of built all the pieces, did a lion's share of the writing, and then he flowed through it to make it what he wanted that story to accomplish. So I've only co-authored a few things. And my experiences between, I'd say, all four of them have been wildly different. So I can't really, I've only had that competitive piece going once, and it
Yeah.
was almost accidental or incidental, I guess.
Speaking of Jamie, we've got another We Dare coming out.
No,
Is
yes, we
that
do.
right?
Sorry. Yeah, that's right. For those who read We Dare 4, obviously all the We Dare series, awesome series, wonderful stories by much better writers than I am. But in We Dare 4, I entered his Contractor Wars universe and setting, and I wrote the story Vocational Rehab. For those that don't know, I've recently retired from the military, and I have extensive experience with leaving the military and all the things that entails. Both perspectives of other people I know as well. Vocational rehab, when you leave the military, is a program where you can learn a useful skill to find employment outside the military. In my story, Vocational Rehab, it's entirely not that. It starts off with what we call it with the title of the first section is a veteran's rant. And basically, my main character, Witch Doctor, he's called that because he had so many problems in flight training with air sickness, something like it's actually a direct story from my history. And that was actually the nickname I had in pilot training. But he rants about um, how basically you serve your time, and then when the military is done with you, you're out, and that's it. And he needs to find his way forward. He starts off at a very low point. He's literally at a club called Rock Bottom, and he progresses from there. It was a lot of fun to write. I think that was the most fun of any story I've ever written. It's basically a high flying, Fast and the Furious ending in a gunfight in a certain establishment. I just finished. I wrote the follow-on story to that for We Dare 5. It's called, oh my lord, Disability Claim, and it partially involved a buddy of his who was very horribly injured, and it was largely Witch Doctor's fault, essentially. And it's a little bit about Witch Doctor paying his debts to that friend. Um, at the same time, getting pulled into a situation that he was definitely not definitely did not want to be involved in. And I tried to bring in some of those same elements from vocational rehab, some of the fun moments of the odd places where he winds up flying, trying to run, or the had a lot of fun in vocational rehab writing the chase scene. I tried to recreate those same elements in different ways in Disability Claim, and I tried to have the ending almost as fun as vocational rehab. So, the Witch Doctor rides again. More explosions. Yeah.
And for just so you know, we're going to be doing a panel show for We Dare 5 here. I believe it's going to be on the 19th, but that date could change. For all those who want to catch that, come on here. Now, let's bring it back to you and the reason why we're here today. If you had to give the elevator pitch for Companion to the Darkness to get people to read it, what would it be?
The hunter Okio and her blind samurai human companion Zato Hachi are searching for the answer to a mystery that could have great implications for the Depik race. At the same time, her rebellious daughter is trying to accomplish that same mission on her own on a vastly different path, a path that no other hunter in the history of time that we know of has taken, at least a knowable history. That's the quick version.
Awesome. And you're.
Hey, if I had to give it a three. If I had to give it a 3-word pitch, wait. How about this?
Mm-hmm.
Blind Samurai Assassin and Punk Rock Dipik. How about that?
There you go. I like that one. What else can we expect to see? Because you're going to be in We Dare 5,
Mm-hmm.
right? Um,
Yeah.
do you have anything else that's going to be coming out soonish, or is it a wait and see?
I think this one is solid enough that I can announce it. I'm actually going to be in the next Bane Noir anthology, Down These Mean
Awesome.
Streets, with my short story Central After Dark, about the odd things that can happen to somebody wandering down Central Avenue here in my own Albuquerque,
Hmm.
in the wee hours of the night, in the dark hours of the
Hmm.
night. Um, I'm not going to be kidding. And I'm not kidding. If anybody knows Albuquerque and has ever driven down Central at any time of day, they could probably see that this story wrote itself. I am control. I do have a slew of short stories out there. I think I'm in one or two anthologies that Three Ravens is pushing out, and I have a few other short stories that I've submitted to various other areas. We'll see what happens with those, but that's sort of. I think at this stage, I'm not sure if I can announce any of that because I don't know if I'm going to be in them.
Awesome.
I think I will. I can't guarantee it.
Yeah. So, where can people catch you in the wild?
In the I will be at LibertyCon this year.
Mhm.
I will be at DragonCon this year. Uh, Beyond that, I kind of have to play them one at a time. I think I'm going to become a regular at the Albuquerque Comic Con in January.
Mhm.
There are other conventions that happen in and around Albuquerque, but they're generally too close to some of the bigger ones that I try and go to, like LibertyCon and DragonCon. Like I think there's a Duke City Comic Con that's the weekend before LibertyCon, and maybe I'll start going to that someday, but not quite yet. I do want to try going to little local conventions, but for the time being, to answer your question directly and stop and not wander around, Albuquerque Comic Con in January is going to become a regular thing for me. I
Mhm.
try to make Fantasy in March. I didn't make this last one, but I do try to be a regular there. LibertyCon, as long as I can get tickets every year, I will
Mhm.
continue trying to be a LibertyCon attendant. DragonCon, I was going to DragonCon. I've been going to DragonCon since I believe 2002, and I'm an eternal member. So even if I wasn't a writer, I'd still be going to DragonCon whenever I could.
Mhm. Well, that's
Um,
where I met you.
yep, that's where you met me back before writing was even a thing I was thinking about.
Hmm.
I think Girl Casey was already thinking about it, and I think Marisa was already aware writer at least. So
Yeah. Well, now let's tell people. Now, do you do a newsletter?
I do a newsletter. As I keep saying, my website is a work in progress. I can't actually guarantee that the links are working right now. But I'm trying to make sure I'm going to try and make sure that that's working in the next week or two before Companion of Darkness releases.
All right.
But all that said, yes, I do have a newsletter. You can sign up through my website. You should be able to find links to free short stories that will
Mhm.
give you linked to. There's also promotions that I'm constantly a part of. So if you can find your way to some of those promotions, maybe through some of the other authors at the very least, you can find my short stories in there and sign up for my newsletter that way.
So, what's the best way if people want to interact with you? What's the best place to do that?
Honestly, through that newsletter, it links to a email account that I use entirely for my writing, and I do have people contact me through that Gmail,
Hmm.
through that account. And I'm always happy to get some fan mail, and I'm always happy to respond. I might not be the timeliest because I am busy, and sometimes I miss those things for a few days. But contact me there; I will get back to you. You can also interact with me on Facebook. I'll be honest, Instagram, I have a whole lot of followers who are bots. So Instagram is a good way to follow me. It's a
Hmm.
horrible way to interact with me because I'll probably assume you're some bot scam from China or something. So, or wherever they come from, Nigeria. I don't know where they're coming from these days, but wherever it is, I kind of don't trust anything on Instagram if I'm going to be honest, unless I know you personally.
Hmm.
So, Facebook. If you get on my newsletter, and you feel free to contact me through there. I think there is a means of contacting me through my website, though I've only ever received a few messages. And again, that can be kind of tricky because I can't really verify your identity there.
Yeah.
But you can try and see what happens.
All right. Well, like I tell everybody every week, if your favorite authors or publishers have a newsletter, go ahead and sign up for it. It's the quickest way to get news about those authors, about your publisher. Um, and you get free stuff, so you can't beat it. So go ahead and do that, and of course do that for CKP as well, and join their newsletter, sign up for their Patreon, support this show, support CKP, and follow your favorite authors on Amazon, and like and submit reviews. Please submit reviews for any books that you love. If you don't, be quiet. We don't want to hear it. And so with that, I'm going to go ahead and promote a few other things that we have going on here. One of which is my guest today is on the latest episode of Future Books with Randall Willis, produced by our good buddy at Shark Flight Media, Ian Malone. So go check that out. You'll learn about more about Companions to Darkness, as well as what's coming up next for CKP in the coming future. Of course, I mentioned this in the last show. We're going to have some new shows coming up. One of them is going to be Feral Ladies. I think I'm going to go ahead and launch the first episode the week after we air this episode, and it has the Feral Ladies themselves, Marisa Wolf, Alyssa Olthoff, and Casey Zell.
That's awesome.
And this was an idea born out of the pandemic, where we all became a little feral, and the ladies are just going to go in there, and it's mostly going to be them talking mad shit and having a good time, and so we don't know what to expect, but we know it's going to be fun. And then I think the week after that, we're gonna have Last Call, which is we get some authors together and they start talking, basically pitching books, either books that they've already written, that they're currently writing, or that they would like to write, all with the aid of some social lubricant, or just being high on life and having a good time. So those will start. We're going to have, I think, 3 episodes before LibertyCon, and then we're going to try and have a live episode coming live from LibertyCon. And so, Casey, if you want to be on that, yeah, you're more than welcome. Have you already been on an episode yet?
I have not been on Last Call yet. I think whenever I see the calls for it, I'm always busy. Got a lot going on all the time, but I'll see what I can do. I'd love
you
to.
are busy, man. Well, if you're going to LibertyCon, you can be a part of the live one.
Oh yeah, definitely. That's happening.
All right. So last but not least, and if I'm paying attention while, like I said, we're pre-recording this, but if I'm paying attention during the premiere, I will put a link to the book at the beginning of the show and at the ending of the show for you to click on and to buy the book if you haven't already done so. So please do so. It would be greatly appreciated. Please like and leave a review. Any parting words, Casey?
Nothing I think I haven't already said. I hope everybody enjoys it. I had a lot of fun writing it, and I love it.
Awesome.
I love what I did with it.
Case is a great writer. We're going to see a lot of great things coming from him in the future. I appreciate you coming on the show, Casey, and that we were able to get this in. And good luck. I'm sure the book's going to do well. Everybody loves a murderous cat. And to all those watching in the future, now and in the future, thanks for watching, and we will catch you next time.